we get recognized everywhere. It doesn't matter where we are in the world. I mean, we were at Universal yesterday, walking through the park.
At 75 years old, after nearly 5 decades in the pawn business, Les Gold became what he calls a street-level economist. But what happened to him wasn't just another day behind the counter. It was the result of a lifetime spent watching desperation up close. So what really happened to Les Gold at 75? And how does one man carry the emotional weight of thousands of small, unseen tragedies? Join us as we look behind the television persona to understand the emotional toll of being the man who sees America's economic desperation up close. The weight of legacy. Les Gold's Loans was on Michigan Avenue in Detroit. That was where young Les first learned what desperation looked like. His grandfather, who he called Popsy, taught him that every pawned item had a story behind it, a moment of need, a family in trouble. The shop smelled like old leather and dust, and things people never came back for lined the walls like a museum of broken promises. Les watched his grandfather handle each transaction. He moved fast, got things done, but there was something else there too, an understanding of what it meant when someone walked through that door. These weren't casual browsers. They were people who had run out of options. Popsy had rules. Never shame a customer. Never rush them when they're explaining why they need the money. Look at the item they're pawning as if it matters, because to them, it does. A wedding ring was not just gold and diamonds. It was a marriage that might be falling apart. A guitar wasn't just wood and strings. It was someone's dream of being a musician, now being sacrificed to keep the lights on. When Les made his first sale at 7 in his grandfather's shop, he felt the pride of following in his family's footsteps. His grandfather clapped him on the shoulder, and for a moment, Les felt like he belonged to something bigger than himself. But that pride came with an invisible burden. He was learning to profit from other people's hardship. And while that sounds harsh, it's the fundamental reality of the pawn business. The math was simple, even if the morality wasn't. Someone needed cash immediately. The pawnbroker provided it, but at a cost. Interest accumulated. If the person couldn't pay it back, the item became the shop's property to sell. The pawnbroker won either way. Les understood this even as a child, though he couldn't yet articulate why it sometimes felt wrong to win in a game where someone else always had to lose. Popsy tried to ease that burden with his philosophy. "We're not taking advantage," he'd tell young Les. "We're providing a service. Banks won't help these people. We will. Sometimes we're the only option they have." It was a rationalization, but it was also true. The pawn industry existed in the gaps left by traditional finance, serving people who lived paycheck to paycheck, who had bad credit or no credit, who couldn't wait for loan applications to process when the rent was due tomorrow. But childhood lessons were just the beginning, and Les would soon discover that family expectations could create their own kind of burden. A childhood stolen by commerce. While most 7-year-olds were playing with toys, Les Gold was learning negotiation and profit margins. By age 12, he had started his first business, buying pizzas and reselling them by the slice to classmates at Hebrew school. The entrepreneurial spirit adults praised was really a child being trained to see every interaction as a potential transaction. There's something sad about a kid who learns to think like a businessman before he learns to simply be a child. While his peers formed genuine friendships, young Les was already calculating profit and loss, already learning to read people's needs and vulnerabilities. Those skills would later make him successful, but they also meant he could never experience the carefree innocence of childhood. Those early years shaped Les into someone who could handle business pressures, but they also created a person who could never escape the feeling that every relationship had an economic dimension. The excited little boy who made his first sale had no idea he was setting himself on a path that would mean 68 more years watching people's lives fall apart, one pawned item at a time. Les's relationship with his father was strained in so many ways that it affected him for life. Unlike the mentorship from his grandfather, his father made him feel pressured, and it was a different kind of pressure, a harder edge that valued success over sentiment. Les has acknowledged that working with his father created tensions that never fully healed. In family businesses, personal feelings and work problems often get mixed together. Every argument about the business feels more painful because it involves family. For Les, trying to be a good businessman and trying to make his father proud felt like the same impossible goal. Because they weren't emotionally close, even great success couldn't make Les feel truly happy. No matter how much money the company made, he always wondered if his father was actually satisfied. This pressure made Les work harder, but it also meant that his achievements never felt like they were enough. But walking away from family conflict doesn't erase its impact. And Les carried those complicated feelings into his own business and his own understanding of what it meant to be a father working alongside his children. Opening shop in a city's decline. When Les opened American Jewelry and Loan in 1978 at the Green 8 Shopping Center on Detroit's 8 Mile Road, he was planting his flag in what would become one of America's greatest urban tragedies. Detroit was already showing signs of decline, but Les was young, ambitious, and determined to build something of his own. The location on 8 Mile Road was symbolic. That road showed the dividing line between Detroit and its suburbs, between poverty and prosperity. Setting up shop there meant Les would serve customers from all sides of Detroit's divided communities, and he would witness how economic hardship didn't discriminate. In 1993, Les moved to the current location on Greenfield Road, a massive 50,000 square foot building that had been a bowling alley. The expansion showed success, but it also meant committing more deeply to serving a community in crisis. The bigger the shop grew, the more desperate stories passed through its doors. Over the next decades, Les watched Detroit transform from a struggling city into one teetering on complete collapse, and his pawn shop became an emergency room for economic casualties. The 2008 financial crisis and human desperation. The 2008 financial crisis was especially tough on Detroit, and Les saw the damage firsthand. As more people lost their jobs, the items they brought into the pawn shop changed sadly. People stopped pawning extra luxury items and started bringing in things they actually needed. They traded in wedding rings, family treasures, and tools they used for work just to get by. During this time, Les had to keep huge amounts of cash ready because so many people were coming in for help. While the shop made many more loans than usual, it was hard to watch. Many people couldn't afford to pay back their loans and were forced to give up items they loved just to survive. What made it even worse was seeing the same people come back week after week. They would sell their belongings one by one just to survive. First, they sold their jewelry, then their TVs and computers, then their furniture, and finally the tools they needed for their jobs. Every time they returned, it was clear their lives were getting harder. On July 18, 2013, Detroit officially went bankrupt because it owed more than $18 billion. It was the biggest city in American history to ever go broke. For Les, who had lived in Detroit his whole life, this wasn't just a headline in the news. It was proof of the suffering he had already seen every day in the faces of his customers. The bankruptcy followed years of declining tax revenue and failing city services. Police response times had climbed to nearly an hour. If you called 911 because someone was breaking into your house, you might be on your own for 60 minutes or more. The city's population had plummeted from 1.8 million in its heyday to barely 700,000. More than half the people who once called Detroit home had left. Those who remained were overwhelmingly poor, trapped in a city that could no longer provide basic services. The streetlights went out. Whole neighborhoods sat in darkness at night because the city couldn't afford to fix them. Ambulances took so long that people stopped waiting and drove themselves to the hospital. Fire stations closed down. The ones that stayed open made do with old equipment that barely worked. Parks turned into overgrown lots. Roads developed potholes big enough to damage your car. Detroit hadn't just gotten worse over time. It had fallen apart piece by piece, year after year, until what was left barely functioned as a city anymore. For Les, the bankruptcy meant watching his hometown officially declare what everyone knew. The automotive industry that built Detroit had largely abandoned it. The factories that once employed hundreds of thousands of people had either closed completely or moved their operations somewhere else. The jobs that remained paid much less than the old manufacturing jobs had. The people in his shop weren't just temporarily down on their luck anymore. They were living in a genuinely failed city with no clear path to recovery. Through all of this, Les kept American Jewelry and Loan operating, kept providing loans to people who had nowhere else to turn, and kept bearing witness to the human cost of civic collapse. When television said goodbye. In 2010, the TV show Hardcore Pawn started on the True TV channel. It was a huge hit right away. 2 million people watched it, making it the most popular show the channel had ever had. For 5 years, the show followed Les and his children, Ashley and Seth. People all over the country watched the daily drama and the sad stories that happened at their pawn shop. However, in 2014, the leaders at True TV decided to change the channel's style to focus only on comedy. Even though Hardcore Pawn still had many fans, the executives felt it didn't fit their new plan. They stopped making the show and canceled it in 2015. To make things worse, the channel ran advertisements that made fun of the show. One ad even showed a mean comment from a viewer that said, "I want to hardcore punch whoever made this show." The show wasn't canceled because people stopped watching. It was canceled because the network didn't want it anymore. Les and his family felt rejected. They had worked incredibly hard on the show for 5 years, but now they were being tossed aside. The network decided that real stories about people struggling with money were no longer fun to watch. Les was used to business deals falling through, but this felt more personal. It felt like his life's work didn't matter. It was as if the network was saying that a silly comedy was more important than showing the truth about the economy. To make matters worse, no other TV channels wanted to pick up the show. Of all the losses Les has experienced in 75 years, few have hurt more than watching his daughter, Ashley, leave the family business. Ashley had worked at American Jewelry and Loan for years, appearing on Hardcore Pawn as head of the jewelry department and assistant manager. Les had groomed her to potentially take over the business one day, just as he had inherited the legacy from his grandfather. This was a very difficult time for Les because he lost several things at once. He lost a business partner he trusted. He lost his dream of keeping his family working together for years to come. Most of all, he lost the chance to see his daughter, Ashley, every day. It must have been very painful when Ashley explained that the work was just too hard for her to handle anymore. Les had spent his whole life in the pawn business, but his daughter looked at that life and decided it wasn't for her. She chose to break the family tradition. She was no longer willing to hurt her own mental health just to keep the business going or to spend her days watching people struggle. Now Les works mainly with his son Seth at the Detroit location, but Ashley's absence is a constant reminder that even family bonds can break under the pressure of this particular business. The 2024 economic reality. In March 2024, Les appeared on Fox News and delivered an honest assessment of the American economy from his unique vantage point as a pawnbroker. He wasn't speaking as an economist or politician. He was speaking as someone who saw real people struggling every single day. Right now, the pawn line is probably twice as long as the redemption line, he explained. This simple observation carried serious meaning. When someone pawns an item, they get a short-term loan and have a set amount of time to pay it back and reclaim what they brought in. That payback process is called redemption. When more people are pawning than redeeming, economic conditions are deteriorating. It means people need cash desperately but can't afford to get their belongings back. They're sinking deeper instead of recovering. Les went further. Our customers are pawning items to make it through the week. Not the month, not until their next paycheck. The week. They were bringing in jewelry on Monday to buy groceries by Friday. They were selling their tools to keep the power on. They were pawning whatever they had left just to cover the absolute basics. This was not about bad planning or poor choices. These were people who'd already cut everything they could. The pawn shop had become their last option for survival. They needed food, gas, and to keep a roof overhead, and pawning their possessions was the only way. Les emphasized this trend wasn't unique to Detroit. Pawnbrokers across the country were reporting similar conditions. The street-level economist could see what government statistics hadn't captured. Millions of Americans were one emergency away from complete financial collapse. For Les at 75, this was perhaps the most depressing milestone of his career. After surviving the 2008 crisis, after watching Detroit go bankrupt, he was now seeing economic conditions that rivaled or exceeded anything before. And unlike in his youth, 75 years of accumulated experience had worn down his defenses. Every desperate face in that pawn line was someone's mother, someone's father, or someone's struggling family. At 75, he had every right to retire, but he kept showing up because this was the only life he had ever known. 75 years of other people's pain. At 75, Les Gold stands behind the counter at American Jewelry and Loan, carrying a burden few can fully understand. It's not just physical fatigue from running a business for nearly 5 decades. It's the accumulated emotional weight of witnessing tens of thousands of personal tragedies, of being the person desperate people turn to when everything else has failed. Think about what it means to spend 75 years in the pawn business. Les has seen generations of families caught in cycles of poverty they can't escape. He's watched children grow up, coming to his shop with their parents, only to return as adults with their own children, pawning their own possessions to survive. He's seen the same people return again and again, each visit representing another failed attempt to get ahead. Les has looked into the eyes of mothers who can't feed their children and fathers who can't provide for their families. He's handled wedding rings from couples whose marriages are being destroyed by financial stress. He's bought tools from tradesmen who can no longer work, and family heirlooms from people who are literally selling their family's history to survive another week. The toll this takes on a person's soul is nearly impossible to quantify. Les has to maintain the emotional distance needed to run a business while simultaneously acknowledging the humanity of the people he's negotiating with. He has to be tough enough to make hard business decisions while remaining soft enough to treat people with dignity in their worst moments. At 75, Les can't pretend anymore that he's just a businessman providing a service. He knows too much, has seen too much. He is a witness to American economic decline in its most intimate form. And that witness role has been his burden for nearly 7 full decades. The success of American Jewelry and Loan, the expansion to multiple locations, and the television run, none of it erases the fundamental sadness of what Les does for a living. He has built an empire on other people's desperation, and while he provides a genuine service, the fact that this service is so desperately needed is itself a tragedy. Les still gets up every morning and goes to work at his Detroit location alongside his son Seth. He still stands behind that counter and watches the pawn line form. At 75, after everything he's been through, after all the losses, personal and professional, Les Gold still can't walk away. Because this is who he is. This is what his grandfather trained him to be at age 7. This is the legacy he inherited and the burden he carries. Les Gold is a third-generation pawnbroker, a street-level economist, a witness to poverty and desperation who has spent 75 years standing at the intersection of other people's pain and economic necessity. Do you think the emotional toll of witnessing economic desperation for an entire lifetime is worth any amount of business success? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.